over 30.
Represent!
Thank you all for joining us and not going to the Joystick podcast tonight. Tonight is an interesting panel that I'm really excited to be a part of. Not because I have anything useful to contribute myself, because I'm primarily a player, but because I've rarely had the opportunity to live in a D&D world or an RPG world that's lasted more than, say, 6 or 7 sessions. These guys, on the other hand, are running campaigns that have lasted in some cases for decades, which to me, as somebody who's occasionally GM'd, seems inconceivable. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves so I don't screw anything up. So let's start on the left.
Hi, my name is Corey Reed. I've been gaming since the 7th edition of the first box set, with the one with the chips where they ran out of dice and they put chips in instead of dice. I didn't discover that there were dice for quite a while. I ran 2 long campaigns. One, the Necromancer campaign, which ran from the early 80s to the early 90s, and was a Dungeons & Dragons game, and one, the Barsoom game, which ran from the mid-90s to the 2005, and was really strange. We'll get into the strangeness later.
I'm Kevin Culp. Over at enworld.org, I post as Pirate Cat. I ran a campaign that started in 2nd edition, and which ended up going to 3rd edition and then 3.5, finishing up at about 16 years. Most of the same players the whole time, same characters, same storyline, one long cohesive arc. I'm currently running 2 4th edition campaigns, both of which are set for 6 years each. Because I figured out if I do another one quite that long, I can only do maybe another 2.5 before I die of old age. so we're pairing it back a little.
My name is Dorian Pires. I go by the moniker Sabiro on the Enworld. And I only ever run one campaign in my whole life, which started in 1995 and it should end in about a year or 2 if I'm looking straight. And I learned everything I know from this guy.
I'm Chris Perkins. I work at Wizards of the Coast. I'm in charge of everything that's related to D&D RPG product. And in addition to running a 3rd edition game for 8 years, I've also been running a 4th edition game for, well, since a year before the game was actually released. In addition, some of you may know me, if not by face, then by voice, as the DM to Gabe, Tycho, Scott, and Will.
I'm just saying.
But I've run that.
So I have a whole bunch of questions to ask, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. But I'll start right to my left. How do you possibly keep it interesting for you that way, much less for your players?
For myself, the key has been bad guys that I really love, and my players really hate. And lots of them. When I kicked off the second of the large campaigns, the lessons that I learned from the first one taught me that what I needed was a lot of bad guys who were basically up to no good and were intersecting with each other in really crazy ways. So I just had a whole pile, I just kind of came up with all of the most ridiculous bad guys I could think of, and I threw them all in the pot. Everything from dinosaurs to insane goddesses to undead kings, like all sort of all the usual archetypes. And then they just kept screwing up with things and getting the players into more and more trouble. And so for me it was, I'm cheering for the bad guys the whole way along, and just watching them try to adapt to the players' ridiculous plans, because you know what these are like.
For me, there are some DMs who are really detail-oriented. They start off with their campaign with every town meticulously mapped out. I am not that guy. When I started out a campaign, I pretty much had, okay, I've got a town, and there's some mountains around it. I think I added gods like a year in. But one of the things which I find utter delight in is watching the world grow and change as my players and as their PCs do stuff. Because what happens is, as they do things, that changes the world. And by the world changing because of what they do, that really gives them a lot of buy-in and makes it fascinating for me as I try to figure out how people react to what they do.
I actually stay motivated somewhat by big moments that I can see coming from a long way off. I follow a kind of design trend that I learned from a guy named Steve Moretsky that he gave a long time ago, where the plot goes from point A to point B. It can take a lot of different routes to get there, and that's really up to the players how it gets from point A to point B. But I have a pretty good idea the general arc of where things are going. And I can see like moments of great drama and interest and significance to the players coming a long way off, and I sit up at night cackling about them, knowing that if everything goes right, 15 months from now, I'm going to blow the players' mind.
I'm one of his players. Awesome.
I actually pay my players to stay in my game. Because I'm actually a very unlikable person, as many of you know. So, in all seriousness, I run a type of campaign that is very detailed. And I usually start the campaign off, even before we sit down in session 1, with coming up with 3 big story arcs for the campaign. Big stories being things like, there's a war going on over here, there's a coup going on over here, those kinds of big things, knowing that I don't know how long it will take for those to play out. 1 or more of them might actually end quickly, but 3 is usually enough to sustain me for at least several years.
I mean, it's interesting, Kevin, you talking about essentially, not to put words in your mouth, winging it, which because the idea that you're going to wing something that lasts so long, I mean, what is it that keeps the players interested if you are, in fact, just kind of shooting from the cuff?
Well, so I don't want to say that I'm shooting from the cuff all the time, right? As we go, I have sort of vague arcs. One of the things that actually I learned from Dorian is that you just throw out a crap load of plot arcs, and then you see what the players bite at, and then those are the things that you develop. And the things that the players don't bite at, well, they come back to bite them later. Because the world isn't static. And so if they choose to ignore somebody, that's awesome. They should go follow the paths that are fun for them. But those bad guys they're ignoring, they're still doing stuff. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about sort of what they're doing and how that's going to change other things. I usually, a little bit like Dorian, I tend to design cinematically. So when I'm designing an encounter, I think, okay, what's maybe the coolest thing that can happen? And then I will build the rest of the encounter. And I'll lead in order to get to that part. I've got down the line, I've got 3, 4, 5 things, which I sort of want to get to, and how the PCs get to them, or even if they do, is up to them. But that's sort of what I'm shooting for. I have a general idea of the plot, I just don't have all the details worked out yet.
I mean, but when you're doing that, how much time are you spending prepping a session?
So 3.5, like 3 hours a session. 4th edition, 15 minutes. Some of you heard me say this earlier. In my opinion, 4th edition is much, much easier for the DM than it is for the player. My game prep has gone down to virtually nothing, which is great. I spend time like falling asleep at night. In the shower, I'll think about stuff, but very little time, and I'll scribble some of that down, but not a lot of time actually doing a lot of game prep.
Does that